The panel that we're about to begin is very important. I think it's the most important panel. It's the question of how is the movement going to exert power? Now, I think that's the most important question.
Yeah, thank you.
But I think a lot of people in the movement and a lot of sympathizers with the movement have been framing the question differently so that it doesn't address the power issue. They've been asking, rather than asking about power, they've been asking about space. And they've been asking about space because space creates, at least in our imagination, the opportunity to create our own society, to create alternative institutions, to make life into a cooperative or whatever. I'm not trying to put it down, but I am revealing in the way I say it that my own preoccupation is different. My own preoccupation is with the question of how the movement can exercise power leverage against institutional authorities, particularly the financial sector, for example, and against the state. So, what?
I said you're talking about powers,
Wait,
but I've...
let's let them start.
Oh, yes, that's
Okay,
the
sorry.
way I define it, but you can redefine it when you talk about staying if you feel the need. So now we're going to, here our panel, we're going to have descriptions of the way the movement activists in Spain, the United States, Greece, Mexico, Japan,
And now Egypt is here. Mohammed.
Muhammad, where Egypt, oh my God, Egypt, how movement activists really around the world are thinking about power, the opportunities to force the authorities to respond to movement demands or desires or imaginations or hopes. You go first.
Okay, so in Spain, there's been a key moment, which is last September now, in which there was this action to surround the Congress, which become big, and it has become kind of this center for a shift between what was understood as a more of a cultural change, as more of a small level autonomous creation of alternatives, which was the 15M, May 15 movement, and this new this new era of the movement that revolves around this new action that is, instead of focusing on having a square in which we can create our commons and reproduce the things that we need to live, the things that we want. Instead of doing that, the movement goes to Congress and surrounds it in order to not ask, but ¿cómo se dice? Exigir.
Demand.
A new constitutional process. So to demand nothing less than a new constitution, and so that was something that was important, and so now everyone is talking about exactly this, how is the movement going to affect the institutions of power, and it's a very interesting debate. I would like to maybe point out two things. The first one is that although I appreciate a lot the type of discourse that, as you were right now, saying, that it's true that we have to address the issue of institutional power. I don't think it's. I'll give an example. This concrete action in which everything becomes like, let's say, serious, right? Like now we have grown up, and let's go to power, and let's reclaim institutional power. When you see that action, what happened, and I know it could be different, but in this time what happened was that clashes with the police, basically, right? So instead of kindergartens and people doing food, and people talking to strangers, and people being able to be vulnerable when they speak in public, which is what we had in May 15th. Instead of that, what we have is strong activists, right? No kids in the street, of course. Not many, people like me that don't like to be in these situations of violence. And what we have is, taking the public space and basically starting to have classes with police and insulting police and this type of thing. And then detentions and people, basically they end up going home and until the next time. So this is one thing that I think we should consider, because all the creativity, the creation of ways of life, creation of discourse, the creation of affects, of taking care of other people, all of that is not as present now in this new type of action. And if we lose that, we are losing, I think, a lot. I'm not saying that this is the only, that this means, okay, let's go back to our nice camping, utopic space outside of society. No, not at all. We have to address the problem of institutional power, because basically the neoliberal elites are destroying the society, basically. And we have to address that, but well, I wanted to put that there, and also to add that many people in Spain are talking about this constitutional process and trying to, it's a moment for social creativity also. How are we going to do this process? Of course, the key is that it can be, well, as democratic and as transparent as possible, decentralized. We have many people now saying that why things have to always happen in Madrid. If we want to create a strongly democratic process, a new constitutional process. And then, of course, there's the debate about, that has been there since the beginning, should we do a political party? Should the movements go to the elections? And now there have been last weekend these regional elections in the Basque Country and Galicia. The right wing has won in Galicia, they always do, but it's true, they have, even with the whole thing, even with the situation as harsh as it is, people go and still vote to the right wing in Galicia, and that makes this debate more controversial, because many people are going to say, no, we need to reclaim the identities of the left again together to stop them. And some other people, and I tend to go more to this other side, is we think that we have been trying with the identities of the left for a while. Like maybe we can try something that belongs to anyone, a movement that is not excluding, and for that I think the key is to be creative in terms of process, in terms of the democratic process. How can it lead us to a kind of creation of new institutions?
Thank you. The United States.
Entire United States.
Looks nicer, doesn't it?
Well, okay. In Occupy Wall Street, the label that is Occupy Wall Street, the banner under which many different groups operate, there's a spectrum of relationships to the institutional left and to state, and I tend to fall into, I tend to take a confrontational position in relationship to the institutional left and to the state. Other people, collaborate more directly. But I guess I'll talk a little bit about Occupy Farms and about this sort of radical wing of the labor movement, because I think they're kind of polar opposites in approaches. And Occupy Farms, after the park, a lot of people who had been involved with kitchen and with sustainability, and who were interested in food justice and land and just eco-related issues in general, got involved with Occupy Farms, and they started a network. There's 6 or so farms in this network. The closest one is in Mosaic. And the goal, so most of these farms are sort of soft occupations, in the sense that maybe they were not being used to their fullest potential. The owners were absent, and there was some kind of negotiation with the owners to allow them to stay. And there are a lot of details that I won't really get into, but basically the goal was sort of, take back the land, take the land, live off the land, and also develop networks with urban environments and communities. So there's a CSA coming from Mosaic now. There's also a fleet of like veggie-run converted diesel buses. And the goal there is to provide logistical infrastructure and to transport the CSAs and also to transport people to and from farms. So there's that, and also, there's been this move toward alternative economic models, and there's the free store, and that's been going on for a long time that predates Occupy, but some people who got involved with Occupy also got involved with the free store. And a focus on just building alternatives, building alternative institutions, and networks of support. But we haven't put a lot of energy into that, I think, because we, just as a whole with Occupy, tend to focus on ways of action, and a lot of energy gets put into that and then doesn't go into supporting the alternatives. But there are people who are working on that. So the other end is this sort of radical wing of the labor movement, which positions itself so that it can have access to rank and file, but is in kind of a difficult relationship with bureaucrats, right? And sometimes they're supported and sometimes they're not. The hot and crusty workers is a case in point of how this sort of radical wing operated. They seek demands, they seek higher wages and support they support workers, but it's not they're not really seeking any kind of fundamental transformation beyond that, at least in the short term. I guess this sort of side of Occupy sees these small wins as building toward a more fundamental transformation down the line. So there's the prefigurative, we're winning as we go, and then there's the making demands and strategic alliances for change down the road. So I guess, I don't know what the future really holds. I think there are times in which we can support one another, and times in which we can't. I think it's incredibly difficult to have relationships with unions, especially during an election season in which a lot of these unions are supporting the mainstream candidates. They're a wing of the Democratic Party, and so they have their own allegiances and their own power dynamics, and their interests are not necessarily the interests of these institutions are not necessarily the interests of the people involved in those institutions. And so there has to be some space for people to get involved outside of that. And Occupy provides that space. I guess that's where we are now.
On to Greece.
Okay. I think there are two things that we should keep in mind about Greece when we talk about the relationship with the state and institutional powers. For a short time, I already mentioned them during the first section of the discussion, but for this one, I think it's really important to keep them in mind. The first one is that the political system in Greece is actually collapsing. The political parties can no longer represent social relationship nor social interests. There is almost no social consent on maybe even the idea of having a government. If you take a look at what's happening in Greece and even in the mainstream discourse of the media, etc., you think that none of the political parties wants to govern. They prefer to be, of course, in the parliament, of course, but not really to govern this country. It's very risky. So again, I'm saying that all traditional forms of political mediation are dying right now in Greece. Both the parties and the unions and the traditional leftist and workerist identities. It's really, it's strange to think about the relation with the state and institutions in this environment. The second thing we should keep in mind is that, as I said before, in Greek movements, there's been a huge anarchist and autonomous tradition. And it's been like that since the 70s, what with a huge Greek anarchist scene, especially among the youth, and the many autonomous workers' struggles in the 70s and the 80s, before the Social Democrats took over and tried to co-opt this whole thing. And again, during the last decade, this thing is growing and growing. So, in a way, the movement has almost always been kind of clearly anti-state. It was almost always opposed to the state. It was anti-institutional most of the times. And the most important thing, which relates to this period we're talking about, the last 2 years during the crisis, all these traditional forms of political representation mediation were, in a way, asking the movement, what are your demands? And the movement in Greece has no demands. I mean, this discussion has also happened both in Spain and the US. I know about it. So, in Greece, all these traditional forms of political representation were asking, what are your demands? And the movement was saying, we have no demands. So, what do you want? Why do you gather? Why do you demonstrate? Why do you do that? What do you want? And it was like, we want everything and for everyone. And okay, that's not that simple, you know. So, the notion of I like the idea of political power as the popular power as leverage. I think that was happening to Greece during the last year, and especially during the summer with the Syntagma Square occupation. On the one hand, there were absolutely no demands, no direct discussion with the state, or the government, the ministers, none whatsoever. But there were things, and some dates that the cuts were going to be voted, that the movement knew it was important to, use that leverage that we have. And of course, in Greece, that leverage was the streets. For the whole summer, that the first austerity cuts were going to be voted, the streets were on fire every week. And it was this kind of political leverage. During the first voting, we, as neighborhood assemblies, tried to blockade all the grand avenues leading to the parliament. So we would not let the members of the parliament go there and vote the measures. It was really hard to organize this, and of course, it did not succeed. The police did not let it. There were like maybe 10,000 people circling all the, 10,000 people early in the morning. We were there from 6 o'clock in the morning in order to blockade these streets. And of course, there were very violent clashes with the police, and of course they chased us away. But when this kind of leverage actually worked in our favor, and there were times, again during the summer, that we had reoccupied the Syntagma Square from the cops, and it was like this huge feast, It was the first time in the Greek movement that we actually chased away all the police from the center of Athens. And there was talk about the Prime Minister resigning, and he talked and said, yeah, we'll probably resign, Then he didn't. Really bad. Yeah. But we were like, it was a great validation of that popular power. We have so much leverage, we couldn't imagine things like that. So I guess for the movement in Greek, that is the real question. How can we use this political power as leverage? I mean, for example, what we're doing in the neighborhoods with the electric bill that I was talking about before, it's not like the assemblies had a demand from the state or the electric company. We demand, we have this piece of paper and we demand that you do not cut off people's electricity, or you take back the taxes, the property taxes. We know that they're not going to do that. There's a memorandum, and then there's the IMF. It's not way to do this institutionally, at least in Greece right now. So we knew this was an issue of who's gonna, prevail. We're gonna use this political leverage in the neighborhood and great sectors of society being sympathetic to the movements and gain something from that leverage, not with a straight demand, but with that leverage.
So what's
Wait,
No,
No, not yet.
can we hear from everybody? And,
yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
Oh,
otherwise,
fine, no, it's fine.
I just don't like to hear your impatience. It
Sorry.
grieves me. Anyway,
Oh,
Egypt.
So, I have a question and a comment. This was a question is about the...
and to share your experience in Egypt too around power.
Okay, I will try to do both. So, the question for Spain.
Can you speak up loud?
Sure. So, my question actually is...
Oh, and I'm sorry, we didn't introduce you earlier because you weren't here. Could you just say like a line about who you are and where you come from, or what you've been doing?
I'm a PhD student here, and I'm part of... I'm a member in the leftist party in Egypt, and the movement, youth movement, and I'm a PhD student here. And I don't represent the Egyptian revolution. I'm not speaking on behalf of the revolution, but okay.
But even if you don't speak on behalf of the movement, can you tell us your impressions of what movement activists think about the potential for movement power in Egypt? What changes, what transformations could the movement bring about, and how would it do it?
Yeah, now we have a very critical question in Egypt about continuing the revolution and maintaining the things we won during the last 19 months in the struggle in the streets. So we have transformation moving from the square, occupying Tahrir Square and big squares in basic cities, to first to street wars and war of positions with the regime, or the remains of the core heart of the regime, represented in the military and later with the police. So, and at the same time we are fighting against the attempts by the recent government, by the Muslim Brotherhood, to reinvigorate the new liberal agenda done by Mubarak. So we had a big struggle actually to change tactics. So the first tactics, the first strategies in the early months was very successful.
Which movement he's talking about, whether it's the Salafis or the Brotherhood, or the secular. I don't know. Which
I'm
movement?
trying to analyze. I'm not speaking on behalf of a movement. This is a point I wanted to raise. I'm trying to analyze the situation from my own point of view. Okay, but I'm not representing the. Yeah.
Are you aligned with any group?
He's
Yeah,
a-
yeah.
From the left.
Yeah.
Which party specifically?
Well, it's a leftist party. Okay, it's was established-
Salafist party.
No,
No.
leftist.
Leftist.
Socialist. No, not Salafist. So, so the tactic actually now it's the challenge actually to change the tactics in order to find new creative ways of first to maintain the commons created during the revolutions and the public interest, and seizing the public property against any way of privatizing or applying the new liberal agenda. And second thing is how to deal with this deep, violent and repressive core of the state. So the dilemma of the regime now that they have two options. Either they create a new state, okay, a new social contract, and new institutions, which needs, first it needs political legitimacy, which the Brotherhood is lacking now, and which is representing the same thing in Greece. So nobody wants to govern, because they realize that this needs either sheer violence, unprecedented amount of violence, to legalize and regulate all the informal sectors, all the slums, all the heritage legacy of Mubarak. So we have a bitter legacy of dictatorship, okay, and nobody would carry this alone, okay, and nobody can claim a legitimacy. Although the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafis won the majority during the parliamentary elections last year, and then the military dissolved the parliament. But anyway, so we have the first track is to use sheer violence to create a new state. Very repressive project. The other alternative actually is much tragic for the ones who rule now is to reinvent or to make the Mubarak regime and the military regime, ex-military regime, to relive this regime, okay, and to govern with the same institutions used by Mubarak during the last 30 years. So they couldn't overcome this dilemma, and this gave us actually time and gave us space to work on the ground. But at the same time, we have another this is the contradiction on the side of the government. The contradictions within the camp of revolutionary people who want to overcome this historical period or to continue the revolution, okay, as they put it as a slogan, is that while there is massive, spontaneous, successful movement managed to overthrow Mubarak almost 2 years ago, you still have to refuse to the parliamentary and party politics, because the right wing won the elections and won the huge majority of the elections, and they using violence. So you have to find a way to gather both tactics. You need to be in the streets. You need to defend the commons, and to make the workers fight for their, to support and be in solidarity with workers, farmers, all the dispossessed in the country. At the same time, you need to put a block or to impede this restoration of the regime. For example, I am very critical about how this moment is actually can be amplified in party politics. I'm very critical about party politics, but in a certain moment I figured out that we have to put a block, we have to make a barricade in the front of the Muslim Brotherhood and in front of the people, in the way of the people who want to restore the regime. So we created the party. Okay, so the party was not a kind of tool to deal with them. We have to go to, we have a legitimate sort of platform to address the other, the population, the public opinion. So this is a main contradiction now in Egypt, that we can't depend only on spontaneous or movement in the street, which is going back and forth all the time, and we have to defend what we gain. We have to move forward. This is my comment. My question actually about it's also related to the transformation of the revolution, because moving from the square to the streets actually and back to the neighborhoods, dealing with different agenda and different items in terms of demands, in terms of politics and mobilization. So when you go to a slum or to the edges or the suburbs of Cairo, so you can't necessarily talk the same language you are talking in Tahrir, or you're speaking in Tahrir. You can give the same agenda, and you have to fight from within. You have to build your own network. And here's another issue we're trying to learn from Spain and Greece about the neighborhood movements and assemblies. First, my question about the mechanism of taking decision. How would you take decision? Because here is a dilemma also. It's it's the irony that Greece and Spain, or Spain basically, as you say, we inspired the mechanism of consensus from Egypt and Tunisia. But now we can't work with consensus. So we have a problem with consensus since the July 2011. A huge problem with consensus. So, and sometimes you need to take a decision. You have to take a decision. Okay, and maintaining neatly democratic horizontal mechanism might not work actually. And here is a dilemma and here is a question actually. What is the mechanisms of decision making and taking decisions in the neighborhood assemblies, consensus, majority, like discussions? Yeah.
Can we bracket that question till we come to the discussion? I think it's a very cutting question. Consensus decision-making in a revolutionary situation. Very interesting question. Can you tell us something about Mexico? Remember, this is the land of the Zapatistas, who gave us the movement without a state target. I mean, they really gave us that idea, didn't they?
Well, I guess that what is going on in Mexico sadly is not as close what's happening in it's very far away from that. But I guess that there are some interesting dynamics, and I think that could allow us to think together. So regarding the relation with the state power and institutions, this movement, Yo Soy 132 in Mexico, actually emerged in an electoral context. And I believe that this is something very important to point out. And it emerged as an opposition to a particular candidate. And this was the thing that was able to bring together people from very different backgrounds, social classes, political positions, the opposition towards the candidate and towards his party and what this party represents in Mexican history. So I believe that that's like the ground of the discussion. I guess that if we call it movement, in the movement, there has always been this idea that you cannot dismiss who governs. I mean, this is not like a secondary question. Even though it doesn't have demands, it does pose the question of, it is relevant what party wins elections, right? And I guess that's on the one hand. But there are also other ways in which there's like a new way of understanding also the state and institutions. And it's all the questions regarding media. Because we usually think that it is something apart, right? One thing is like politics and the elections, and another thing is speaking about TV channels. But what seems interesting to me regarding this movement is that emerging in this electoral situation, it was able to bring together a broader discontent with liberal democracy and with the role of television in this political system. So some people put it very, there are different ways in which you can phrase this. Some people said these kids are reclaiming more competition in media. That seems to me that is the worst way of putting it. Other people said they are asking for democratization of media. That is better, but it's still. But I guess that they are going kind of further and asking, and are pointing to certain relation between TV channels and institutional politics, right? And about how we can really not have an idea of who are us. I mean, who are we? You see, like we have this idea perhaps we're a nation, but we cannot have this idea beyond. I mean, TV. I mean, TV says what is happening, what is not happening. You see, it's just like we cannot know even what is going on in the neighborhood besides yours, right? Beyond the mediation of TV. So I guess that that's something that they brought into the question, and they are undergoing, it seems to me, a battle of signs, a battle of symbols, and I believe that is something that I can also see in some of your stories. And in that battle of science, it's very relevant to be inclusive, right? I mean, to say that this is a movement for everyone, but it's also, I believe that there's also a limitation there. And I don't know, I mean, perhaps I'm playing devil's advocate here, because you were saying the point of a democratic movement is being for everyone and including everyone. And I believe that there is a limit to that. I mean, that there's some effectiveness in, you know, presenting certain movement as all-inclusive, but that really can not go to certain fields. So, for example, in the case of Dios 832 in Mexico, the reason why they became so that they were doing so much noise is because, as I said before, they didn't have leaders, clear leaders as before, but they didn't have demands, but also they were subverting the idea that you usually have regarding student movements or, broadly speaking, oppositional politics, right? They, for example, were very careful in popular manifestations, in taking care of some people not throwing things in the walls. Because usually when you have people marching, kids go and paint things. But there was a huge struggle to avoid, you know, like people, some students to do that. And also in manifestation, there was a huge struggle for the slogans. Because many people were saying, do not make slogans around the left candidate. I mean, we are with the left candidate by default, but we should not make our claims regarding him, right? So I guess that there were all these battles of signs going on, and the purpose was creating this coalition. You see, like presenting this movement not a bunch of rebels, but saying we include students from private universities that are usually the decent ones, right? We do not claim insults in the marches, whatever. There was all this battle, and that's what has made this movement relevant. But I also believe that the limitation there is precisely the kind of things that they can do. So, for example, regarding, once again, the elections, the candidate at the end, this candidate I'm telling you, won the elections fraudulently. And I was in Mexico during the summer in this inter-university assembly in which the question was what to do. I mean, how to impede the guy to take the presidency. And there were actually no ways of doing it. You know, people were saying, let's go to all forms of manifestation and let's take freeways. You see, like, and there was the realization that students cannot do this. They don't have the strength. And this goes back to what you were saying before of scale, right? I mean, you can perhaps save one people to be evicted or other, but you need certain form of organization, a certain force to really make a change at scale. So they were saying, we cannot go out and, you know, and face the police, they are going to smash us. I mean, we really just can't do like these pop-ups. So in a way, they are behaving very close to situationism. You see, they are creating these little situations in different cells. So they, for example, go to a supermarket that was involved in the electoral fraud because they produce cards that they give people in exchange of their vote. So then these people go to the supermarket and buy things with the cards. So what the movement did is that the assemblies went to different supermarkets, pulled their cars with food, and when they got to the line, they said, we're not paying. So, but this at the same time in multiple supermarkets. So I guess that what they are doing is this kind of disturbances of everyday life, and this is what they know they can do, you see? But this is what allows them to don't be too confrontational, to be like creative. But when they want to go further, and the question is how do we impede this guy to take the presidency, then things get really complicated. And they say we need to get together with labor, with unions. But doing that means losing this very fragile, all-encompassing quality, right? It means becoming more radical and therefore losing what has made you strong, that is this possibility to apparently represent everyone. So, I guess that, I don't know if that was clear.
Yeah,
Unions
that's great.
that are so
Great.
left that would make you more radical.
Some, I mean, the thing is that there there are very institutionalized unions in Mexico, but there are also like dissident wings, within certain unions. So the question was, if we get together with unions and with other more stronger social movements, then we can go out to the streets and whatever, confront the military and avoid this guy to take the presidency. But of course this means, I mean, this is serious stuff, and it somehow undermines the very legitimacy that this has as something all-encompassing, right? I mean, when you are willing to make alliances with more radical forces and to indeed take harsher actions, political actions, I mean, that cannot include everyone, I guess. That would be my point.
I was out of line when I asked a question, because my rule is that we don't ask questions after each presenter, so I apologize to all of you.
Moderator's prerogative.
I will
Good.
not ask
Good.
any question.
Feel free.
Until after, we can all ask questions after we hear about the Japanese movement.
Okay, so Japanese movement, power and institution, that's a very difficult question. I mean, Japanese movement had been very, very weak in terms of mass bodies on the street for a long, long time. And of course, people know the 60s, 70s big uprisings, you know, mainly around like anti-US-Japan security treaty, which is understandable because geographically Japan's been always under US sort of lead or by the US global military and industrial capital strategy. So it's like you know, like the big uprising 60s and 70s around that theme, all related Vietnam War, anti-Vietnam War, anti-Korean War, you know, all sort of related to US presence. And now, like for instance, in Okinawa, there's a big anti-US based projects going on. And so Fukushima thing is a very, you know, tricky thing. That for, on the one hand, after Fukushima, the street scene sort of returned. Massive bodies are out on the street, and which is a good thing, but somehow, which is not enough for many of us, my comrades of different groups. Because, you know, we believe like a nuclear issue, Fukushima issue is not just a single issue, nuclear environmental issue that many of you know, movements across the world might consider. It's like everything involved, you know, the state power, capitalism, more like a global nuclear regime kind of thing that we start envisioning. It's like an interest behind it, the whole operation, why like sort of like it's so difficult to kick out nuclear power. Of course, it's a military reasons and industrial reason connected there. So I think many of us believe like, you know, that the very broad sense of revolution or insurrection, whichever you wanna call it, I can choose either way. But we believe, many of us feel that we need something in a very active way. But as I said earlier, this like you know, like a lot of part of Japan now sort of do not have a possibility of this like a basic sort of base building capability of local like a space that you can live and eat a local food, as opposed to like imported global capital sort of imported food, and you know, build a local community as a base of movement. So like a neighborhood taking over city center and mass of strong body out on the street. This scheme is very, very difficult. As I said earlier, even in Tokyo there are hot spots, which is radioactive spots, and some very radical like comrades of mine even insist like people should just evacuate from Tokyo. I mean, probably that will happen in a long perspective from now. We assume this could happen. And so the power of the people is very much around like, you know, again, going back to my earlier story, it's a simple like a life protection project. Of the, you know, again, like mostly, a lot of the projects are led by women. Sort of radiation monitoring, exchanging information, because this is a basic lifeline that the state refuses to do. State and main media, as you said, the relationship. Now I agree, like it's very hard to distinguish the state and media. I mean, Japanese media mostly working in collaboration with the state. And but anyway, as you said about Greece, also the institutionally, Japanese institutions, the government, universities, what else, even family are sort of collapsing. As I said earlier, even family, having a big fissure between like evacuation idea or staying and working for the same company. The husbands wants to stay in the northern part and work for the same company, wives and children want to move out. That kind of thing is happening on the one hand, and universities, authorities really also collapsing. Because of the, of course, it has a lot to do with neoliberal reform. A lot of liberal science, like philosophy and history departments are removed and sort of replaced with this, monstrous department like international communication or whatever you want to call it, something like that, And also, a lot of what you call scholars on the payroll start sending information about radiation safety that totally unscientific. And people just, distrust the whole institution, universities, and, and more than anything, Tokyo is very questionable, survival of Tokyo as a metropolis. Maybe, that's why, again, going back to the story of IMF, Egyptian people kicked out, but unfortunately, Japanese people couldn't. So it took place, annual meetings of IMF and World Bank took place in Tokyo about 2 weeks ago. But anyway, so on the one hand, evidently there's a sign of collapse of even metropolis and a lot of institutions, including government. But on the other hand, it's a sort of surviving as a zombie. And new sort of tactics of the power is the war in Asia. The sign of war around this island, in the Japan Sea, or this is almost as if they, the governments, Chinese government, Japanese government, they fight, but almost they both want it. They both want the tension to shift this whole internal political collapse. And so another thing is nationalism is returning in a big way. Tokyo mayor, notorious mayor, fascist mayor, some American newspaper even called him fascist or something. And Osaka, neoliberal young sort of star mayor, also fascist too. And it's, I don't know how to talk about this balance of institutional collapse and how the people's revolutionary power or insurrectionary power, again, whichever you like, it's okay for me. But anyway, I think, probably, I think street scene will be stronger in the future because really the situation is so fucking bad. I cannot imagine it now. But on the other hand, the most difficult question is this: how we can deal with how we can use this collapse of all these things, family, university, and even Tokyo, for a long perspective, 10 years, 20 years. If it's Tokyo, I think already the sign is a university, the students who want to go to university in Tokyo is diminishing a little bit. And the authority of Tokyo University is, of course, this irresponsible scholars is going down. And Tokyo University used to be really the center of the authority. But all these things, how we can tactically, strategically work with this institutional collapse. But again, going back to this radiation expansion, and this Japan is very small, can we build a base in Kyushu or Hokkaido? But still, Fukushima reactors are releasing radioactivity. And I think, it's almost like a utopian, but I think you know, it could be great to see like a nation state called Japan disappears, and you know, we could build some kind of a global something else. I don't know. That's my question.
On your islands too?
I
Anyway,
think another thing I forgot is like, you know, this like idea of Japan as an island, insular nation is another problem. Actually, East Asia is it's better to see it as a series of archipelago connected, you know. And this history of, you know, like a nation state formation. I hope this is another thing like Fukushima is so horrible as it is, but it would cause this kind of, you know, something, this version of our enemies.
thank you. I want to propose, now, I know everybody wants to talk. So, and we have about 40 minutes, I think, Marina, or less.
A little less.
So here's what I propose. And you can disagree, but please don't. I propose that we take 4 questions or comments, preferably very concise. So think about what you want to say, make it very crisp. We'll take 4 from the audience, then we'll give the panelists who want to respond a chance to respond. Not everybody has to respond at every round. And then we'll do as many rounds as Marina lets us do, okay?
Yeah, it's all of us, but these guys in particular who are on the hot seat.
Yeah,
Okay,
Hot
that
seat.
sounds good.
all right. I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3, and I can only see a hand in the back. Oh, hi, okay. 4, those 4 first.
Okay, I want to come back to the question of leverage that you wrote about and militancy within the movements. That's not something we've discussed that much, but how important was the militant element of the Greek movement in creating this leverage, and how was that also, I'm thinking about the situation here in the United States, and especially, and of course, in Egypt, which is kind of, it's a little bit hard to compare maybe because of the dictatorship and the police state. But, I mean, the Egyptian revolution was also very militant in a way. So yeah, I'd like to discuss militancy.
Militancy, Egypt and Greece, okay. Who, 2, okay.
I wanted to speak to the issue about developing power to challenge existing structures. And one of the things that has occurred to me is that in this country, there is an absolute hunger for something or somebody to articulate the desires of a progressive movement, i.e., healthcare, Medicare for all, a public education system that teaches kids to learn and respects teachers and communities, a Department of Peace, absolute focusing on the prison industrial complex. All of those are issues that I'm assuming that not only people in this room, but a lot of people in this country are just waiting for something to articulate and, quote, put on the table in an empowered way. You notice I use the word empowered. And it may be, sometimes I think that's what I want Occupy to do. Occupy still has a lot of power. I mean, it's still, the 99% issue is still being used in mainstream discourse. I think it's, I wouldn't say it was permanent, but it's there. And people, you know, discourse off of it. And it may be that if Occupy did that in the spirit of anarchy that I once heard Cynthia Milstein say, what is it that you want? Not necessarily what you demand, but this is what we want. And putting it in that way, what might happen is you would bring along a whole constituency, which you wouldn't be able to control, but it would be a specific power that could challenge that institution. It also may be that the system is so broken that it wouldn't be able to handle it all.
Okay, so the idea is that the articulation of issues which reflect the troubles of the American people will also mobilize the American people. You're 3, right?
Yes. We have this ironic situation of all corporations, be they public or private, for-profit, non-profit, religious, derive their authority from states, which they are trying to destroy. So you have those things hanging out there, the IMF, the WTO, the World Bank, that the power is somehow floating out there and they're manipulating everybody. So it gets an expression in, say, 2 or 3 major sectors: finance, insurance, real estate, which has become global. So you have the US Treasury dialyzing the global banking industry, and we get to pay for it. But at the same time, it'll have the effect of, in Spain, what is a global real estate market collapsing in Spain with people with second and third homes, and that's not discussed. We're trying to blame the collapse here on people of color who couldn't hold their mortgages, which is not any part of the story here. And then on the media front, we have such things as you have all of Mexico, 100 million people, and you have Carlos Slim. Or you have in New York City, we have Michael Bloomberg, we have Rupert Murdoch, and we have everybody else. And the discussion is not getting out over there. But I see a sort of a break in the energy sector, and it's coming, the Fukushima effect, but it's not just that. Everybody who's been involved in the nuclear movement has been following what's going on there. This integration over there and its impacts, and a lot of those people were tracking from the disaster in the late Soviet Union on that. But they're also making the connections that are finally coming there, and Occupy is beginning to get involved with that, with the whole fossil fuel thing and the like. So I can tell you that people are beginning to speak who are dealing with fracking, which is a global phenomena, which is really disemboweling the planet, the tar sands, the nuclear power, which doesn't exist anywhere without government guarantees. But it's at a small scale. It hasn't gotten to a big scale. But people are following. New York put into place, and I'll end at that, a stop for the while on fracking here, which was immediately picked up by the province of Quebec, which immediately echoed in France, which then echoed in the western part of South Africa. So everybody is watching at some level, but not with enough people responding. But I think that there's something that is happening there, but it's at a small scale.
So the idea is building the popular power to stop corporate power. You see a potential.
Yeah, I guess I want to open up a different topic, but I don't know if it's too broad. Talking about institutional power, I'm talking about what is the relationship between a popular movement, a mass movement, with either demand and not demand, an electoral process in the middle of an election here. Some people would say, we should stay away from it. And the Greek election had specific ideology. Anyway, it's a large question.
It's a large question, and it may be different in different places.
Yes, and maybe I'd like you to speak to it.
Oh, do I have permission?
Yes.
No, you don't have permission.
Indeed.
If you'd like to. That's all.
Okay, so we have 4 questions. Does anybody want to speak to any of them? You don't have to.
Francis, you had a question also from Mohammed at the beginning that I'm.
Oh, that's true.
And add that.
All right,
because
Mohammed's
there are 5
question. You used your speaker's time to ask a question,
Yeah,
and it was,
questions.
what kind of mechanisms for decisions do we have as we move from the square to the streets to the neighborhoods? Consensus, will it work? It doesn't work. Isn't that your question?
Well, yeah, let me make it more broader to see
What's working?
Yeah, how do you
make decisions?
Simply, how do you take decisions in the urban commons or the neighborhood itself?
Okay, so anybody who on the panel who wants to answer Mohammed's question can answer Mohammed's question, or any of the other questions about militancy in the movement in Egypt and Greece. The litany of American troubles, and they're pretty serious, and what we're going to do about them, or what anybody's going to do about them. The question of how to stop corporate power, and the relationship between movement politics and electoral politics. Those are our questions. Who wants to speak to one of them?
I mean, I want to talk about power in general, but I guess I wanted to pick up on just how we're talking about power here, because it seems like we're talking about power at this political level or established political level, and how we articulate like ourselves in relationship to that. And I just find it kind of strange, because I think in all of these cases we're experiencing this crisis of legitimacy, and we sort of won this political debate. You know, like there's no question that in the U.S. The two-party system and electoral politics in general are just corrupt and not serving people's needs, and no one really believes in them anymore. I mean, that's been for decades. There's been a crisis of legitimacy building, and we're just hitting this like crisis point. And people, realize this connection. I mean, Occupy is all about realizing this connection between the economic power and political power, and going to the economic power, not even addressing the political power, because we know that it's really the economic power. And so, why are we talking about our power in the same terms? And I just, if we are to articulate what we really want, it's not in relationship to those powers, it's in relationship to each other, making demands of each other, right? And how are we actually, what does it mean to go beyond just this political discourse and actually have material, like, parallel power, Like, what are the points of dependency that we have on Wall Street? We're starting to see this articulated in Strike Debt, using debt as a frame to understand the ways in which we're dependent. But I don't think it's just debt. It's one way to view it. And I guess I wanted to just open it up a little bit and to really talk about what we mean when we say we're building our own power. Because personally, we need land, we need housing, we really need space, not just in this like abstract political space of the square, but we need material space as well. And we need to be able to feed and house ourselves. We need to be able to produce ourselves. And what does that production look like? Anyway, so just, what are we talking about? Are we talking about building power? And yeah, that's all.
This is the panel's time. Anybody on the panel want to speak to any of these issues? Greece.
Greece.
Yeah, if you'd like, we can start with the militancy, and we can. I have also a response to the.
Okay. So great.
And Teresa.
For the first question about the militancy and political leverage, what's the relationship between the two? To be honest, I was kind of expecting this question, for Greece. Of course, the level of violent confrontation with the state is very different from Egypt, considering, of course, the social and political circumstances. But it's true that the Greek movement has quite a big reputation on being confronting violently the state and the police, etc. To a degree where I think it can be viewed as a revolutionary kind of spectacle that could maybe even alienate us from the practical reasons why we have to confront violently the police. Why these classes are important? What do we gain from them? Do we gain some beautiful pictures that we can put on the posters, and the whole world is going to see, oh, what's happening in Greece? They burned down, it's all burning and looting, and etc. No, I think we have to avoid that kind of thing, and we have to think about what we gain as a movement, how during these classes, first of all, how do we steal space from the state, which was very important during last summer with the Syntagma Square, which was, as I said before, a completely new experience for us. Actually managing to keep the square ours, and the police being chased away from it. And that was a really long and important process politically. I mean, it's not like it was, you know, in a cold, as in a war, you know, there is this camp and that camp just happens. It's a process that contains constructing new political and social relationships among us that are solidarity and struggle. It's self-defense, it's protecting one another, and it has a practical result. We were the ones that, for these days, could keep the square. So, of course, it has a very strong relationship with leverage. I mean, the situation was like that, you know, with the IMF and the memorandum and all that stuff that was happening really quickly. I mean, it was like an automatic weapon, you know. The austerity cuts that were being voted, I mean, honestly, if you ask me, what exactly has been voted in Greece the last 2 years, the last 1 year and a half, I can't list them. It's too many. I mean, there's no way you can you know, exercise leverage for in a specific austerity cut, a specific measure that they're avoiding. Really, I don't know them all. There are this many. There are hundreds of measures that have been voted. So yeah, this kind of, you know, confrontation with the state as a whole was very important for this political leverage that we try to exercise. And yeah, in some ways it brought results, especially in the smaller scale, you know, like with the electric company and some hospitals and things like that. But wasn't successful with the austerity cuts.
But it was successful in building the movement, you're saying?
Of course, yeah. That was the most important thing right then.
Tell us about Egypt.
So last summer I was in a workshop. I was invited to a workshop by a friend. She's working in an institution for freedom of expression. So they believe more on the legal struggle. They invited undergraduates from Cairo University, and other two universities. So they are between 18 and 22. Okay, so young men. So their opening experience, or the first experience with politics, was the downfall of dictatorship. So they made a survey. What was the reasons for, first, did the revolution succeed? Second, if it didn't succeed, it didn't fulfill or deliver its promises, what was the reason? What were the reasons? So the first reason actually was the lack of militancy. Or we weren't militant enough. And it was very striking for this context, living in freedom of expression, liberal rights or legal struggle. And the workshop magically actually turned about discussion about anarchism and about red brigades and other violent or militant experiences in Egyptian history, which are repressed by the dominant narrative about revolution and history of modern Egypt, etc. So there is a kind of demand or a kind of yearning to talk about militancy within these young generations. And they are different from my generation, the generation who, like the 1990s generation and other generations. They are very different. Their experience is very fresh, and they have self-confidence. We have different experiences and different examples all over, from my experience, from all over the city, from in Cairo, for demand for militancy, beginning from occupying auditoriums in universities, or forcing deputies or deans of some schools to resign, reaching to occupying. I was talking with Mina yesterday about there's a place called the Occupied. So during the revolution, people homeless, or not homeless, like people who didn't have permanent housing, they went and occupied 4,000 apartments in one place, and they called it now the Occupied. So there is huge phenomena and examples of militancy that's still fragmented. And the issue is how to create a discourse now to represent this and express this, and to propel forward a discourse on militancy, which is not necessarily raising the issue of polemical issues or polemical slogans about violence or revolutionary violence, which is sometimes necessarily very necessary, But it's also about the militancy in terms of political action, of taking a political action and reclaiming the city and reclaiming the country and reclaiming the process of continuation of the revolution. Although the media in Egypt and of course in the United States is trying to assess that this revolution was non-violent and trying to make binary this situation in Libya, Syria, and in Egypt, saying like this was the best way to overthrow a regime, which is very misleading and very it's not very wrong and very tricky, because the revolution in Egypt, although there is no comparison about the level of and the scales of violence by the regimes in Syria and Egypt, but the revolution in Egypt was not peaceful, it was not non-violent, it was very violent, and the issue that there was one image that the media trying to propagate about which is very true, which is very real, which is very inspiring about Tahrir Square, but there were other issues. There was, and here is what I'm trying to work with other people now. When I remember sometimes that I'm a historian or PhD student, so I trying to work like to document the experience of the revolution in the suburbs and in the other cities. How there was an articulation between the squares in Suez and Alexandria and Tahrir and the suburbs, and how people actually raised issues of very militant issues, actually, which like the first people who attacked who defended actually the public commons, or who during the first phase of the revolution who fought with the police were the ultras or the football yeah, they are not hooligans, but they are like the like deep heart, like ultras. Yeah, the ultras. Yeah, they are. Yeah, yeah. So before the revolution, people were claiming that they are going to be like kind of potential fascists, or like because they have bonds and they have like discourse about fraternity and of clandestine work. Okay, and of course they have this clashes with the police, but the revolution actually tipped this potential completely and make it very revolutionary now. So then now any confrontation with the police or any big demonstrations, actually you find voters participating, and like the way actually it's not also about militancy in terms of very serious, but it's also like making the pleasure of being in a protest, okay, of singing. If you compare the protest by the Muslim Brotherhood, who are very tactful and very successful in recruiting thousands, flooding the squares with thousands, actually. If you compare it to the other revolutionary movements when they organize a protest, another protest, or alternative protest, or better one, you would easily actually differentiate between how the revolutionary and this young men, women movement and protests are very cheerful. It's about living the moment. This also should be integrated into the discourse of militants. It's not only Molotov and like fighting the tear gas and all this stuff, which is very important. Which is very important because we had severe clashes with the police, and the dynamic even in Egypt and in Syria and Libya and grand scale, the martyrs, and those people are young men. So you have 50,000 martyrs in Libya who are in 20s and 30s, which is like there is a potentiality of creating new discourse of militancy, which is not necessarily confined by the idea of violence and counter-violence, war of positions, but also about how to reproduce life and how to reclaim this life, and how to why we are reclaiming this the city. We are reclaiming, reproducing our life in an alternative way.
I want to say just a word about two questions. One has to do with whether militancy, street action, really constitutes movement power. We've been talking about it as though it does, and contrasting street action, militants to electoral power. But I think that the U.S. Occupy movement's idea of strike debt contains within it another idea about power, about the kind of power that people can mobilize sometimes if those in institutional power and with institutional authority depend on them. Strike debt is a proposal to experiment with the many forms of indebtedness that millions of Americans now carry, and to defy the norms and the laws that say debtors have to pay it back to lenders no matter the conditions and the duplicity of the loans. Which brings me to my second point. I was asked to talk about movement electoral. I'll just be a moment. But if Occupy were to succeed in figuring out how to do this and how to defend the people that do it, it would be in a much better position if Barack Obama won the presidency and the Democrats took the Senate. One of the ways in which electoral politics is tied to movement politics is that movements can be repressed. And they're much less likely to be repressed if they share constituencies. If the elected politician has to worry about those of his voters who are either in the movement or sympathize with it. All right, next panel of questioners.
And can I add something?
Oh, yes.
Quickly, sorry.
Sure.
Another reason why, and coming back also to what Marisa was saying, another reason why the movements need to address institutional power, I think it's not only because of repression, but also because when you start constructing mutual aid and commons, as is happening in Spain, what happens is that, for example, I have a lot of friends that right now are replicating, they're creating the social value that the state should be creating right now. They're doing the work that the state should be paying for them, should be giving them spaces to use. I mean, it's about reclaiming the wealth that we have, that the state has, and that the state is giving to the financial elites. So that's why I don't think it's contradictory, you know, that there's the creation of commons in many aspects of life, trying to be reproduce the social life through the commons, not depending on the market or the state. But at the same time, we reach a point in which we see that we want the wealth of the state for these commons. Because people are paying taxes, those taxes go to the bailouts for the financial elite, and then you get nothing, and then you have to do it. You do your own daycare, you do your own cultural projects, and no one is. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, we have four. One, you were tried to get in the last round, and I didn't let you. 1, 2.
Marina's back here too.
Marina, oh no, you. Do you want to ask a question?
3. I'll be 4 if you're
3.
She's 3.
4. Well, this is probably the last round.
I'll try to be very, very quick.
What?
One is, in response to you, I'd like to ask about the American situation and throw out for devil's sake a very primitive idea that counterintuitive, that if Romney wins, maybe you would get more of a movement in response. But anyway, let's leave that. And to you on Greece, this was facetious, but not completely facetious. You mentioned about the corruption of the parliamentary system and everything else. And I'd like to suggest maybe you can go back 2,300 years, and maybe Greece will come up with some very creative process for the rest of the world. The main point I wanted to make was with you. I mean, 35 million people. Tokyo is still the biggest metropolitan area in the world, as far as I know. And given Japan's size, evacuating this would be incredible to me. But my question to you is, where are the so-called parties of the left? Where have they gone? And Japan still is the only, where are the so-called parties of the left? The communist parties, political parties of the left. And my comment to you is Japan still has the only country in the world that has this peace constitution, which maybe Ishihara is trying to overturn. But I'd like to see an evaluation of protest in Japan or Japan could articulate a new vision for the world, especially given this whole mess of trying to get a permanent seat in the
All right, we got the idea.
Security
All right, 2.
Something that I saw articulated in most of these accounts so far was the aestheticization of movements in particular places, the mediation and the transference of information of these different movements, the lack of communication between what is actually desired to be changed of people and not just within exclusive activist or milieu communities, but the confrontation of these boundaries within the everyday, the disturbance of the everyday, and the polarization and sort of the schizophrenic leanings of trying to enter electoral politics in comparison to like the spectacle of whatever militancy that happens in the event. What would you say has the potential of transforming the social relations so the activities of the commons aren't necessarily based as a reaction to what isn't given by IMF or World Bank, but actually is breaking down the relationship of labor and class and like everything that goes along with this? So what work can be done in this, and like what are your examples?
So how can you transform the commons so the commons becomes a transforming agent, right?
Yeah, where you are present and you are militant, and this is like the moment in which you want to exist, where you're not just always in reaction to someone else's work, but you're working together, and there's a feeling of being present with each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, real quick. This is for everyone. I'm just curious how you envision the work that gets done in universities in terms of teaching and scholarship, and how that relates to community organization and the things that get done within local neighborhoods. So if this has been meaningful for you guys in your social movements, or if it hasn't really played a role, and how you guys envision those two working together and collaborating or not collaborating.
Thank you, Marina.
Okay. No, it's a question on, because I think about this a lot, so I think this is like the heart of the question in a lot of ways for our movement, because our point of reference is each other in most places and not institutional power. But I also agree with Luis. Like, they've got stuff and it's ours. They define it as a social relationship, a thing, whatever, you know. So how do we maintain our own agenda and our relationship to one another, creating the militancy, recuperating workplaces, which just recently happened in Greece, all of that, and get what we can from the state while trying to break it down? I mean, like, I know that's a very complicated question, but then how we maintain our own agenda in the movements in relationship to institutional power, whether we have a relationship or not.
Okay, the rules that I invented and object to said that you could choose whether you wanted to answer any of these questions. Do I have a volunteer? You can pick a question.
I would say that I give my turn for other people that want to respond. I mean, I know, because I think when hearing your questions, I think many people here had a lot of interesting things to say about these things. I've said a lot already, so I would like to hear you guys.
I mean, how can that be?
I think I'm going to answer that in relationship with militancy and why this revolutionary party disappeared in Japan. Japan today is a negative example. The militancy in Japan has a very sad history in the 70s and 80s of intra-sectarian struggle. That, as if like it's like a main project, a main target, as they lost, like they are accumulated sort of forces underground, above ground. They started fighting each other, killing each other, different sects like the Trotskyists, Maoist Trotskyists, Communist Party. They officially, at that point, parliamentary party and non-armed revolutionary line. They had given up late 50s. Nonetheless, they had, forces, underground forces. And so, this is like a very bad example of like a militancy or militarism. The militancy that you said is a little bit different. More like I still believe, so after the 70s, 80s, that's the self-destruction of revolutionary party. Like, of course, the model is what the so-called Leninist party, Vanguard party, like 5 or 6 important, guys decide whatever they want to do, kind of structure. But anyway, so it's like a process of militarism with sort of self-destruction amongst themselves. That sort of like gave a very bad sort of history of example for the idea even of, for the youth especially. It's a bad example. So we have to sort of recover from this. And, so when we do that, like, in a sense, like, the so-called anti-authoritarian idea has been very important in Japan. But it's no more like a party, the notion of party doesn't exist. But still, like, this has to, so be worked many times. And so that's the answer.
May I raise something that's a question? Oh, sorry.
Very, well, it's
not
very
another question.
irregular.
It's not
but very quick.
No, it's not another question. Carry
Okay.
on where we are.
Okay. Everybody else on the panel?
I mean, I'm a
We're
bit,
not forcing.
no, it's just I'm a bit frustrated by the formality of this,
Me too.
because I thought it was going to be more of a conversation.
Well,
and
can I
instead-
jump in with you for a second?
Yes.
Because, if I may, what Marina asked and what this woman asked over here, I think, has a lot of breadth in this room, which is, it has to do with how we can capacitate the dimensionality of all of the ways that we are going to make the world better. And some of it is prefigurative practice, and some of it is revolutionary practice on the street, etc. And so I wonder how we can talk about the relations between leveraging power, like together, the relations between revolutionary leverage of power, or let's not call it power, let's fuck power, whatever, response. Active response to things that are broken and that are breaking people's lives, simultaneous to living the future now. And how is that, what's the correspondence? What are the conversations that happen within Occupy, within these movements, between the dimensionalities of that? And I feel that's been in this room so much, but we aren't really talking about it.
Marina, as the boss, do you want to tackle this question?
Oh, I'm
with
so
the
not the
panel?
boss, but we had hoped to have a dialogue. I think we are in a it's tricky though. I mean, one, we're supposed to be wrapping up and going to the next one soon, so that's one issue, but that we do have 6 people from 6 geographic locations with really exceptional experience. So as awkward as that might be, I think hearing from particular locations is really important.
But it makes it very, very formal, as the United
Yes.
States lady says.
Yes. So how about since
why don't we take some comments? Just take some general comments.
Okay, so at 5 o'clock we're breaking for 15 minutes, and then we're going to kind of huddle and maybe think of yet perhaps another way of having this conversation when we do it next with Susan Buck-Morss on the question of future possibilities. But for the next 5 minutes, I'm sorry, but it's up to you, Francis.
Well, you really want to get into this conversation, and
I would like to go back to what Marissa said, because I actually abhor this nationalization language of Greece and U.S., even though I understand it as a reference. I think that the fact that we're all in this room means that there needs to be a reappraisal of what I call in my own work geoprimal. We're all geographically located, and there's a primacy and an importance to that. However, it's a slippery slope to becoming our territorial reality, where we decide that that's actually an inherency that is not such. But to go back to this thing that Marissa brought up, which is this sort of the way in which the discussion of power has unfolded. I think what's specifically important in all of these examples, and does happen here in the United States, and has happened in all of these diverse sort of people-grounded movements through history, is that instead of relying on a kind of social expectation of provision, namely government and institution, what Occupy, and certainly Spain, and certainly Greece, and Egypt, and Mexico, and Japan, and many, many others, the moments of activist success is precisely the moment where we, because I consider myself part of this, are able to manifest the experience of creation and execution. So that means that not everybody participates at the same level. That means that a lot of people who are frightened perhaps get reassured when they see these creative gestures, when they see singing in the streets as opposed to militancy, or they see some kind of delight or children or feminization of movements. I'll wrap it up. The point is that the place where we get to stop thinking of power as external and up there is the point where we have a sense of ourselves as successful executors of power and create.
Is it quick? Because we're 15 minutes late.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to what Marina asked. If it's very brief.
I want to give you.
No, because I believe that it's an issue that has been present during the whole conversation. What you were asking of how do we maintain our own agenda, and reclaim what comes, what is ours, what is in the hands of the states. I just wanted to point out that I guess that for me the problem is who this we is. For me this is not clear. It's not something like, we are taking for granted that there is a we, and I believe that the whole contest is to define who is this we, and this is what I was trying to point out in the case of Mexico. The very idea of alliances and who is the we and who is the adversary is in contest, and I believe that you do need an adversary, but the very definition of who you are is defining opposition to something else. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank everybody. Have a short break. What field are you in?